When Thomas of Ercilden came back from the Eildon Hills, he had spent there 7 years. A fairy had seduced him to follow her to the deep core of the hills. She taught him to rhyme and to say the truth and to see the things that will come. So Thomas came back as a rhymer to the area of Galashiels. He foresaw kings and queens rise and fall, and a bridge to be built over the Tweed. In the early 19th century, Sir Walter Scott collected stories like the one of Thomas the Rhymer, and he published them under the title of Minstrelsy of the Scottish Border. The author of Ivanhoe, Kenilworth, Rob Roy, and other historic novels lived close to Galashiels, where, right next to the River Tweed, he had turned several old farm buildings into a fantasy castle named Abbotsford. The original ballad about Thomas the Rhymer dates back to the time around 1400. Before he met the fairy queen, Thomas fell asleep under the so-called Eildon tree. The bridge over the Tweed that Thomas foresaw after he had come back from the fairy's secret realm under the Eildon Hills was said to be seen from exactly this place. Today, the so-called Rhymer's Stone commemorates the place and the story. Actually, today there are 3 bridges over the Tweed, exactly in the place that Thomas had foreseen, built in 3 different centuries. Perhaps Thomas the Rhymer had not only foreseen the bridges, but the modern architecture of Galashiels in general. In 1958, Frank Scofield founded his company named Scofield Dyers and Finishers in Galashiels. At that time, the town in the Scottish borders already looked back on a thriving textile tradition that had its origins mainly in the 19th century. When Scofield arrived there in the late 1950s, 30 chimneys that belonged to textile mills towered over the town that stretches along the Gala water and the River Tweed. Before moving to Gala, as the locals call it, Scofield had worked in the Huddersfield mills in West Yorkshire. There he had become friends with the textile designer and painter Bernat Klein. Frank Scofield and Bernat Klein, who both dedicated their work to the beauty of yarns, threads, weavings, colors, and textiles in general, play a core role in the life and architecture of Peter Womersley. If he hadn't met the 2 textile pioneers, Klein and Scofield, Peter Womersley might never have found his way to Galashiels. And a close connection to the textile industry of the Scottish borders was to become a guiding motive in the English architect's work. The very first house that he ever built was a 2-story bungalow he designed as a wedding present for his brother John Womersley. Farnley Hay, as it was named, was built between 1953 and 54 near Huddersfield. Frank Scofield was so very much impressed by the bungalow and the modern ideas behind it that he decided to get into contact with Peter Womersley. The architect he encountered was a young man who was deeply fascinated by the modern architecture of the United States. Born in 1923, from 1946 to 1951, Peter Womersley studied architecture in London. He was especially interested in the architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright and in the bungalows that were designed in the context of the Californian Case Study House program. The Los Angeles-based magazine Arts and Architecture had launched this program in 1948 and published the modern ideas of architects like Richard Neutra, Ray and Charles Eames, and Pierre Koenig. After the Second World War, arts and architecture was an important way for European architects to reconnect with modernism. When Frank Scofield moved to Galashiels to establish his textile company, he commissioned Peter Womersley to design a bungalow for himself. The two-story bungalow was built in 1956 and 57 in an orchard that is located on a slope in Gattonside, with an overwhelming view of the Eildon Hills. Gattonside is a village on the River Tweed, close to Galashiels and Melrose. Frank Scofield also recommended Womersley to his friend Bernat Klein, and in the end each of the three young men found his way to Galashiels, where they established their careers. In 1957, Womersley also built a bungalow for himself in Gattonside, not far away from the orchard. He named it The Rig, and in the studio he added to the building, he started his architectural office. The textile designer Bernat Klein had moved to Gala in the early 50s already to found his company named Colorcraft in a 19th century building on the banks of the Gala water. Today it belongs to the textile department of the Heriot Watt University in Galashiels. Later on, the textile designer renamed his company to just his own name, to Bernat Klein. As they both strongly believed in the ideas of modernism, Bernat Klein was to become one of Peter Womersley's closest friends. All in all, he commissioned him to design two extraordinary buildings for him. Close to Frank Scofield's two-story bungalow named The Orchard, there is another, smaller bungalow that could equally be located in California. It is called Little Orchard. When years ago Frank Scofield had to sell his company, he intensely struggled to buy it back. In the end, he sold the orchard and moved into the Little Orchard, and he actually managed to win back his company. The chimney of Scofield Dyers and Finishes today is the last one in Galashiels. Impressed by the arrangement of the two modernist bungalows that are located so closely together in one large garden in Gattonside, I knocked at the door of the Little Orchard. A very friendly lady opened the door, and she explained to me that her house had not been designed by Peter Womersley, but by Duncan Cameron. I was so surprised and happy about her information that very spontaneously she introduced me to Dorothy Cameron, Duncan Cameron's widow. She also lives in Gattonside, not far away from the orchard, in an elegant bungalow designed by her husband in the early 60s. From the large windows and the terrace of the building you can not only see the Eildon Hills, but also Melrose Abbey, the place where, after a long journey, Robert the Bruce's heart found its peace.
I'm very grateful to Peter Womersley because it is thanks to him that we came to live in this lovely village in 1961. When my husband saw that he had won the competition to build the offices in St. Boswell's, he thought Peter would need an assistant, and he greatly admired his work. So we came to have an interview with Peter. Peter was a great sun worshipper, and he greeted Duncan wearing only a swimming costume, which surprised him a bit, but he was a sun worshipper as well, so they hit it off, and he came here to work for Peter as his first assistant, and worked with him for about a year and a half, and we've stayed on. So Peter has built many interesting buildings in this area, and I hope you will get a chance to see some of them.
Yes.
Do you want me to say anything else?
Yeah, but this was a lot already. Thank you. Yes, and especially the story about the interview with the swimming costume. That's how I think that fits the reputation that Peter Womersley has. That he's also a jet set architect, but a bit
his own thing. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll let you dismantle it all again.
In 1963, Duncan Cameron established his own architectural office in Galashiels. Today it is a thriving company with a branch in Edinburgh. And interesting enough, the Galashiels office is located in a building designed by Peter Womersley, directly at the Gala water. Womersley had built it in 1960 for a company named Sanderson and Murray Skin Works, which was closed in 1980. Dorothy Cameron was so nice as to take me to the rig, Peter Womersley's own house, and she introduced me to the current owners, who are also architects. Just like the orchard, which was built on the slope of Gattonside, the rig is located high above the Tweed. Of course, also Peter Womersley himself saw the Eildon Hills from the large windows of his living room, but as he was a passionate lover of cool cars, he also found an especially elegant solution for integrating a garage into his house. He also built a studio for himself right next to the rig. Today, Peter Womersley's former studio is inhabited by a couple who is specialized in textile design. Another very early project of Peter Womersley was the prototype of a bungalow he built in Gattonside in 1956 and 57, at the same time as the orchard. He intended to have this prototype built in series by the building company Murray and Burrell from Galashiels, but this series never came into being. Today, Peter Womersley's original prototype bungalow is hardly to be recognized. A pointed roof has been added to the house, and only its incredible view on the Eildon Hills still exists. All in all, Peter Womersley designed a number of buildings for people who were involved in the textile business of Galashiels. Besides of the orchard for Frank Scofield and the office building for Sanderson and Murray, he also built a bungalow for the Gibb family. This building, named Moneymusk, is located in the south of Galashiels, close to Sir Walter Scott's mansion named Abbotsford, just on the other side of the River Tweed. One of Peter Womersley's reasons for spending almost all his life in Galashiels was the amount of personal and artistic freedom he enjoyed there. This freedom might also have been a reason why he was largely interested in designing private homes. Nevertheless, he also took part in competitions for the design of institutional and municipal buildings. In 1961, he won the competition for the design of the Roxburgh county offices in Newtown St. Boswell's, not far away from Melrose and the Eildon Hills. Due to the renaming of the whole area, today it is called Scottish Borders Council. As this was a big commission, Womersley searched for an architect to help him. It was Duncan Cameron who applied for the job successfully, and this is how he and his wife Dorothy came to Gattonside. Womersley was known for always aiming at the most beautiful and most perfect solutions. The construction of the office block and the concrete tower took until 1968, and by that time Womersley's idea had only been half implemented. In addition to that, later on, the atrium in the center of the building was closed, and also the whole entrance area was changed when, in the 1990s, an annex was added. In contrast to this, a very delicate functional building he designed in 1966 is the former post office of Gattonside. Its shape is closely related to Womersley's bungalows, but it has been turned into a restaurant. Today, only a red pillar box remains of its original function as a post office. The only social housing complex Peter Womersley has ever designed can be found along the Church Street in Galashiels. There he implemented a lot of beautiful ideas and provided the buildings with the typical elegance of his bungalows. The stairs give the buildings some lightness and create a contrast to the walls that were made of grey and green, carefully selected stones. With the use of the stones, he also relates to the old church that gives the street its name, and the arrangement of the colors and the shapes of the stones almost remind of Bernat Klein's use of colors and textures in his textile design. Today, Peter Womersley is mainly known for the bungalow and the studio he designed for the textile designer Bernat Klein. The architect took his search for beauty and perfection very seriously, and he is described as having been very strict about his ideas. In Bernat Klein, he found a friend with whom he could discuss these topics extensively, as the textile designer shared his deep love for light, colors, textures, details, the truth of materials, and an overall belief in modernity. The first building Peter Womersley designed for him was a large bungalow named High Sunderland. It was built in the middle of a beautiful landscape close to Selkirk in the south of Galashiels in 1958. Under the title of The See-Through House, Bernat Klein's daughter, Shelley Klein, published a book about her parents' house just recently, in April 2020. There she describes how intensely Bernat Klein identified with the house and how difficult it was for her to leave High Sunderland after her father's death in 2014. With its large windows, High Sunderland offers a smooth transition between inside and outside, as it is typical for a modernist bungalow. In his house, Bernat Klein was constantly surrounded by the changing light and the colours of the Scottish landscape, which was the main inspiration for his paintings and his textile design. High Sunderland was also the perfect location for elegant fashion shows, and fashion editors from all over the world travelled to Selkirk to see Bernat Klein's latest designs. In 1962, Coco Chanel chose Klein's fabrics for her spring collection, and soon other designers like, for example, Christian Dior, Pierre Cardin and Yves Saint Laurent followed her example. In the late 1960s, Bernat Klein commissioned Peter Womersley to design a studio for him. In 1972, it was built close to Bernat Klein's bungalow. People who drove by with their cars were impressed by the colorful paintings and fabrics they saw through the large windows. The current owner bought the studio in the year 2000, but today it is in a sad and derelict state. The initiative, Preserving Womersley, however, is committed to saving the building. In the context of my research, I ordered a woolen pullover designed by Bernat Klein. It was sent to me from California, from the cool north of San Francisco, and I took it back to the place where it had been designed. Peter Womersley was interested in the delicate construction of transparent bungalows with large windows, but he was also fascinated by the architecture of Le Corbusier and the sculptural quality of Brutalism. In 1963 and 64, he built the new stands for the Gala Fairydean Football Club, a crystalline concrete construction. Jim Gray, who runs the Station Hotel in Melrose, was so nice as to visit the building together with me. He showed me around and told me his own story as a player, coach, manager, and chairman of the Gala Fairydean Football Club. And it turned out that he is not only deeply involved in the football club, but that he had also worked together with Peter Womersley. Before he started running his own hotel in Melrose, he worked as a carpenter. In this context, he was involved in the furnishing of the Rig, the Bernat Klein studio, and other buildings by Peter Womersley.
This picture here was the building of the new concrete stand designed by Peter Womersley. It's at the skeleton stage here, and this would be, the stand was opened in 1964, so this would be probably 1963. Ironically, the chap that's at the top of the stand there, working on the stand, he stays quite close to the ground, and he still comes down to the club, to the social club, so he's still alive. When the stand was completed, it was, the Gala Fairydean had a friendly match against a team called East Fife, and they opened the stand with a match in 1964. My involvement with Gala Fairydean Football Club was a way back to when the stand was getting built. I was playing for a boys team. I then went on to play for a local amateur team. Then I went on to play for Gala Fairydean, who now plays on this pitch. I was a player with Gala Fairydean, a coach, a manager, then I became chairman of the club. And now, for the years of service that I've had with the club, they made us honorary president. And I now come down to the club, most home games, currently have a hotel down in Melrose. Met this lovely young lady who was asked about Peter Womersley, so decided to come down to Netherdale, show her this photograph, and we'll probably go back to Melrose via Gattonside and I'll show her where Peter Womersley stayed.
The Dingleton Hospital was a mental health facility located in Melrose that was opened in 1872. It consists of a vast number of detached buildings, and when the hospital was closed in 2001, they were converted into residential buildings. One of the buildings is still waiting for its conversion, the Dingleton Boiler House. It was built in 1976 and 77 by Peter Womersley, and it replaced the old Victorian boiler house. In the Station Hotel in Melrose, I met Ernie Munro, who had been working both in the old and in the new Dingleton boiler house for 38 years. He told me about the positive working atmosphere in the hospital, the golf club across the street, and he also described how in the end, in 1991, it was him who switched off the machines of the boiler house forever.
1991 when it closed, that's when it closed up there. I was on that night from 4 o'clock to 12, and I said to Julian, I said, it's the queerest feeling you ever heard or saw in your lifetime, I says, because the coal was up above and it came down and down like that, but along the fire, and then it dropped down as ashes as it finished, and I had to go way back up on top of the boilers. I was just on my own, but you get what I mean, well, I've done it all my days, and I had to shut this valve, shut that valve, and at 12 o'clock at night, when the other chap came in, he says, what's wrong, Ernie? Because I was still up on the top. I said, that's it, finished. But we still had to work there, because we done the phone service, you see, and they hadn't got it connected right, we hadn't a button. But it's a listed building, and they can't do anything about it. And seemingly, there's somebody in Galashiels is wanting to make it into flats. The bottom bit, it's a huge bit at the bottom, but up the stair a wee bit, it was all concrete. It's called a concrete jungle. There's an ash plant, you see. When the fire went down into ashes, you had to put this switch on, and the ashes went up. And then up above that, the coal was at the very top, because the coal went, the lorry came, Pearson's had done this. They came right, put the coal right down, and the coal went right away up, right away up. Have you ever seen that bit up there? Right up to the very top of the building, and then back down into the fire.
So was it like on a conveyor belt?
A conveyor belt, and it was alright when everything was going alright.
So did you start working there just when it opened? Or?
Oh no, I was there in 1953. I went there in 1953, and it was shoveling at the fire. Mills in Hoyk, Mills in Galley, everybody was stuck shovel coal into the fire. That's all you ever done. And then later on, when they closed the old boys, Womersley built that. No, he didn't build it. He was the architect for it, and everything changed altogether. And you never saw the fire.
Peter Womersley spent almost all his life in the Scottish borders. It is fascinating to see how many buildings he designed for this area and how close to each other they are located. In addition to that, buildings designed by him can be found all over Great Britain, like for example the Nuffield Transplantation Surgery Unit in Edinburgh, the building for the former Midland Bank in Huddersfield, the Hull University Sports Hall, and also a 2-story bungalow named Valley Spring in Bath in the very south of England, to name just a few. But Womersley's career took also place in another, completely different part of the world, in Hong Kong. He went there for a first time in the early 60s when he was involved in the renovation of the legendary Peninsula Hotel. And later on in his life he returned there for various other projects. Peter Womersley died in London in 1993.